Congratulations, you're under contract. That means both the buyer and seller have agreed to all the terms negotiated and all have signed the North Carolina offer to purchase and contract. So what's next? Think of the closing as a timeline. A typical closing takes 30 to 45 days from contract to close. Let's base this example on a $300,000 house. When you go under contract, you've negotiated an amount of money called the due diligence fee. This is a personal check written by the buyer to the seller. It's a non-refundable deposit that says, "Hey, Mr. Seller, thank you so much for taking your house off the market while I do all my inspections and decide if I want to stay in contract or leave the contract for any reason or no reason at all." This usually freaks out the buyer and the seller alike. It's supposed to be a small fee, typically 0.02% of the sales price. In this example, about $600. But in a strong buyer's market, we've seen those fees skyrocket as buyers are competing with multiple offers and want to look very serious to the seller. A typical due diligence period is about 3 weeks. Sellers always panic and say, "Why should I take my house off the market for 3 weeks during prime selling season and the buyer can leave? That's not enough skin in the game." The due diligence fee is not the glue that holds the deal together. During the due diligence period, the buyer has a home inspection, pest inspection, radon inspection, makes the loan application, has an appraisal done, hires a closing attorney, and has the title work done. They do everything they need to feel comfortable and confident moving forward, and all these things cost money to the buyer. Keep in mind, in North Carolina, all homes are sold in their as-is condition. No repairs are required. But ultimately, sellers want to sell and buyers want to buy. So typically, there will be another round of negotiations for repairs that the buyer feel are important to have done in order to stay in contract. The seller can make the repairs or offer money instead of repairs. They can do both, or they can choose to do neither. Keep in mind though, sellers want to sell. They didn't put their house on the market for fun. And if it's something big, they'll most likely have to fix it for this buyer or disclose it to the next. If a buyer is unsatisfied, he can walk away from the deal. The seller keeps his due diligence money and the buyer is out all the other fees he spent. But more often than not, buyers and sellers are happy to move forward because that's the goal in every transaction. After the due diligence period, we move into the earnest money period. There's another amount of money, the earnest money, that's given by the buyer and held by the attorney in an escrow account. It's typically about 1% of the purchase price, or $3,000 in this example. A buyer can't leave during this period. If he does, he'll lose his due diligence money, all the fees he's paid, his earnest money, and can open himself up for a lawsuit because he'll be in breach of contract. What's happening during the earnest money period? This is where the buyer is clearing any conditions on his loan and waiting for the loan to be funded, while the seller is busy packing his boxes. Now, when the buyer gets to closing, the due diligence fee and the earnest money are considered money he's already paid towards the purchase of his new home. It can be used towards his down payment or closing costs, depending on the advice of his lender. At the closing table, a buyer will sign a ton of legal documents. Most of them say if you don't pay your mortgage, you don't get to stay in the home. When the paperwork has all been signed and the attorney receives all the money from the lender, then the attorney will record the sale of the home with the Register of Deeds and hand the buyer the keys. Congratulations, you're a homeowner.